Alright, what's going on, guys? The world of Elden Ring is expansive and vast, and even though the lands we play through are primarily dead, decorated with relics of the past, the storied history contained within make it all feel very much alive. But this world is about to get much bigger, and more stories will be told, adding even more complexity to the lore that's already established. So in preparation for the DLC's arrival, we'll be focusing on one story in particular that tends to be forgotten under the grand tale of everything else in Elden Ring, and that is the story of House Marais and the Shaded Castle. A story that gives us an alternate look at life in the lands between, and may be quite relevant considering a lot of the symbolism found in the DLC trailer. So as we begin to tell that story, if you want to stay up to date on all things Elden Ring DLC and enjoy the lore and discussion, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, and now let's get into it. In the northern half of Elden Ring's map, along the border of Altus Plateau and Mount Gelmir, is a ruined castle that bears the markings of time, situated at the exit of a ravine and sunken into a poisonous swamp, with many of the structures within the keep walls destroyed and submerged. From the outside looking in, it appears to be a terrible place to live, unfit for anyone of nobility. However, once upon a time, it was a fair castle ruled over by a house, a family of nobility whose story is marred in confusion, obsession, and tragedy. The denizens of this shaded castle are House Marais, who were once prominent, living lives of royalty, although afflicted by a curse that would eventually, through one descendant, cause a chain of events that would bring down not only the family, but the shaded castle as well. So who were the Marais? The word Marais comes from French etymology, meaning swamp or marsh, very fitting in context of the shaded castle. The description of the Marais mask reads, "Mask in the image of a white-haired young noble, customarily worn by the head of House Marais." The Marais family has a dual history spanning generations, serving as both executioners and castellans of the shaded castle. This mask bears the likeness of the first of their line. So there was a time when the Marais held a semblance of authority in the lands between, serving out their roles as executioners and governors of the castle, which leads to a series of questions. Who did they work for? Was the shaded castle their reward for their dirty work? And given their name, was it always built on this poisonous swamp? To answer those questions, we have to look at what makes House Marais unique. Members of the Marais family are characterized by their blue robe, ornamental mask, but also blood-soaked bandages, which lends to the curse of the Marais family. The description of the Marais robes reads, "Robe with a black mantle across the shoulders, customarily worn by the head of House Marais. The sons of House Marais are all sickly born. Little wonder that Maleigh Marais would be so beguiled by the beautiful and fierce goddess who was born into rot." Now, despite that foreshadowing of the end of their story, all male heirs to the head of the family were born with a terrible disease. Perhaps it could be due to the swamp in which the shaded castle sits, or perhaps due to their sickly nature, they found comfort in the swamp. Unfortunately, we can't know for sure, but what we do know is that these heirs of the Marais family had no problem getting dirty in other ways. In the outskirts of Lanedell, in the elevator connecting the forbidden outskirts, in a secret room you can find the official's attire. Now this room is an entire rabbit hole in and of itself, but this attire that you find on the guard outside this prison-like room is a Marais robe, although missing the black sash of the head of the family. The description of these robes reads, "Grubby blue robe worn by magisterial officials to carry out their grim tasks. Surveillance, executions, gruesome rituals, the darkest duties drive the wheels of mankind." So it would seem the Marais family's roots go far deeper than simply being executioners at the shaded castle. They also happen to be employed by the royals to carry out more of the darker deeds. But if the Marais family was so prominent and stood well with the capital, what led to their downfall? To answer that question, we need to look at the current head of the family, Maleigh Marais, who we can find in an open field outside of the shaded castle's walls. The weapon he wields is the poisonous ant spur rapier, and its description reads as follows: "Spur of a giant ant which has been fashioned into a rapier. The blade drips with scarlet rot." Scarlet rot is an old legend, of which Maleigh Marais of the shaded castle was a private believer, and indeed, he eventually found his own personal goddess. And we of course see this personal goddess of his, which the Castellan's Hall has turned into an altar for, and that goddess is Maleigh, the would-be goddess of rot, who Maleigh, a man born into a rot himself, was able to empathize with. But beyond simply seeing her as an inspiration, Maleigh became entirely obsessed, to the point of neglecting his duties as executioner and governor of the shaded castle, and those in line for execution would capitalize on this opportunity. At the base of the castle is a ghost that has this to say: "House Marais is ruined, just deserts for falling for that severed harpy. No surprise that Cretan took the castle and our storied sword. And so began the downfall of House Marais, an account that we can find detailed in the description of the Marais Executioner's sword. It reads, "Storied sword of House Marais, the family of executioners who presided over the shaded castle, one of the legendary armaments. Elemer of the Briar, the bell-bearing hunter, snatched the sword from the site of his looming execution and furnished it with battle skills from his home of Yohed. This is why we now find Elemer of the Briar occupying the Castellan's Hall instead of Maleigh Marais. So after escaping his execution and stealing the sword that would have ended his life, Elemer cast Maleigh from the castle and set the prisoners free, which is why we now find it overrun, destroyed, and sinking into the mire. The story of Maleigh Marais shows the consequences of abandoning one's duty, but also paints a pretty brutal picture of the state of the lands between. But why is this story relevant, and what does it have to do with the DLC? Well, it gives us a bit of a look into the culture of the lands between, or at least how things used to be before the shattering. The world of Elden Ring has a much more high fantasy theme than many of FromSoftware's other works, and part of that theme that bleeds through is the story centering around families and houses, the main players of course being the demigods, and the children of each respective parent combination. But with many other factions at play, in Elden Ring there always seems to be a thread of family tying them together in some capacity, and it's no secret that a lot of that can be drawn from George Martin's influence. But when we look at the houses specifically, they're such an underdeveloped and underused part of the lore. We get some very minor interactions with the members of House Hoslow, one of which is a quest that was not even finished when the game released and had to be finished in a later update, and then of course the single meeting with Maleigh Marais that was the subject of this video. Now of course family is a pretty broad subject, but let's take a look at some imagery in the DLC trailer. Starting with the focal point of Mesmer, he is seen as the long lost child of Queen Marika, a descendant erased from history, for a reason that's yet to be uncovered. There's also this shot of this painting of a man and a woman who's pregnant, giving more themes of a house or family of nobility. We also see that the Carians will play a part in the DLC, yet another noble house of prominence in the lands between. But one of the main things that catches my eye in this trailer are the designs of these two NPCs, specifically their face masks. Now we mentioned earlier that one of the characteristics of the Marais family are their masks, and it makes sense that they would wear them as they're diseased and cover up the entirety of their skin in bandages, much like the Leper King masks used to hide signs of leprosy. But the Marais family are not the only ones that wear these kinds of masks. We see it in the Ruler's mask and in Tanith's mask, and even dating back to the ancient Zamor warriors of the mountaintops. But an interesting bit about the Ruler's mask and Tanith's mask are that they're both said to be of a foreign culture, native to a nation outside the lands between. So I think what this all points to is a larger scope of Elden Ring's world. Players whose nobility is not determined by Queen Marika, but houses whose stories stretch farther than we're allowed to know. And I think that's going to be a big part of the DLC. As Miyazaki did say when talking about the Land of Shadow, that it's home to a different culture than what we've seen in the lands between. And I think the first step to understanding the larger scope of what that could be are looking at the various houses outside of the divine authority in Elden Ring's story. And I think a perfect place to start was with House Marais. But that is going to do it for the video today. I hope you enjoyed the story of House Marais and the Shaded Castle. And if you did, please let me know by leaving a like on the video. Be sure to subscribe if you're new around here, and let me know all your thoughts down in the comment section below. But with all that, I will catch you in the next one.